What's that about? Okay, what does the world start to look like when Christians enter into this sort of deep integrity? And one more example, the last one, beginning with verse 43. And the worst one. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends him rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. I got to preach this passage in a couple of weeks at Pepperdine, and it's a problem. Because I don't know how to do this. And I've discovered that I'm really bad at it. Not only do I struggle to love my enemies, I just struggle to love anybody who doesn't already love me. Now, I do have a capacity to love. And I tend to love people who show me love. And then Jesus comes along and says, guess what? That makes you exactly like every other pagan in the world. The one and only thing that sets Christians apart is they love people who don't always love them back. That's how you show that you're children of your Father in heaven. And so I got to thinking, okay, before I get to my enemies, let me think of another group of people. A group that I call irritants. One of the primary qualities of an irritant is they do not know how irritating they are. These are the people who have no understanding of the impact they have on others. Does everyone have an irritant in their mind? No looking around. I'm thinking of a student I had way back at Lipscomb. We'll call him John. Actually, John was his name. Okay. But that doesn't get us anywhere. Okay. John was the most socially inept individual I have ever met in my life. When I would see him coming down the hall, thinking he might be coming to my office, I would turn out the lights and get under the desk. I'm going to tell you exactly one John story, and you will understand him perfectly. I was teaching a little class of about a dozen students late in the afternoon. And the Lipscomb students felt like they were abused if they had to go to school past noon. So here we are at 2:30 in the afternoon or so, and I've got this tiny little class, and they know I'm a baseball fan, so they think they'll appeal to me on that. They said, there's a baseball game today. We want to go out to the baseball game. Why don't you let us go? I said, I can't do that. I teach this same class earlier in the day. I got to keep the two classes together. It's a teacher thing. And they said, how fast do you think you could get through all of your notes if we didn't interrupt you? And I said, I think I could do it in 20 minutes. And they said, go for it. And so we've got this class project going on. We're going to see how quickly I can get through my stuff and they can get it down. So I go to the board, I start writing like mad, and I turn around, and on the front row, John, sitting there, has his hand up. And I said, yes, John? And he says, I didn't get that back there. Could you go over that again? I do it quickly, and now I'm back, and I'm writing like mad, and I turn around, and guess what? John's hand is up. Now, any normal human being would notice what was going on around them whenever they raised their hand. John should have noticed that when he raised his hand, 11 other people did this. Normal people would have noticed that. But John is an irritant. He's clueless. I go back, I'm writing, I turn around, his hand's up again, and this time, guns and knives have appeared all around the John, however, is oblivious. And so I turn back around and I lecture for the next 15 minutes with my back to the class.
Nice.
I never turned back around. John's hand was up the whole time. I know that was rude, but I saved his life and it seemed more important at the time. Just kind of get your priorities straight here. You couldn't be John's friend in the way we usually think about friendship because John was incapable of friendship. But a few of our students, our most mature students, befriended him. And let me tell you what they got out of it. Nothing but irritation. When you love people that love you back, that makes you like any old pagan. I developed what I call Lila theology from a woman who was in a church in New York where I was working. I don't know how to explain to you about Lila. Just when she was on her medication, she was awful, and when she was off of it, she was worse. Lila was so difficult. She was physical, emotional. It was just a difficult situation. And Lila loved to talk on the phone. And what I noticed is they had developed a phone chain in this congregation of people to call Lila. And there'd be a dozen people that would call her through the day, talk to her 10 or 15 minutes, say, hey, I gotta go. And then an hour later, somebody else would call. Somebody different would take Lila to dinner every Sunday after church. This little church came to understand that if you didn't love Lila, you weren't doing the Christian thing right. And what usually happens in churches, instead of the whole church is taking on that burden, one person does, and every desperately needy person is attracted to them, and they just break them down. Well, here's the Lila theology part. I believe that God in His infinite wisdom has put at least one Lila in every church under heaven. Now, some disagreed with that, saying we have two. Someone is missing theirs. But of course, the point is to find out whether we're going to love the least of these or not. Now, when I struggle with the irritant, how am I going to do with the enemy? Someone who is actively hostile towards me. I actually have very, very, very few enemies. I have such a bland personality, it's very difficult for me to make any. You really got to have a little more going than I do to make an enemy. But there was one guy in Nashville who I guess you would consider an enemy. He was just pretty nasty to me. He would constantly write nasty things about me. He once challenged me to a debate over a book I hadn't written. I didn't think that was fair, so I didn't respond. And then he wrote nasty things about me for not responding. So far from Brother Harris, I've heard not a word. And I went, I think I'll write him. Here's a word, idiot. Fortunately, that was before email was so prevalent. I had time to think about that before I sent it. Had a colleague come to town. He started writing really nasty things about him, and my colleague is a lot more spiritual than I am. And he said, Brother so-and-so, I've been praying for him every day. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, I've been praying for him too, but so far he's still in good health. And, it's at that moment that you find out whether you take seriously Jesus' call to love your enemies. Now, and I think there's a point at which I want to be really careful here. The difference between abusers and abused, torturers and tortured, oppressors and oppressed, the distinction between those two groups must not be done away with. There is a difference.